The girl who couldn't join. The colony yard was filled with the sounds of laughter and the thud of a ball striking the dusty ground again and again, as children of different species ran in circles chasing it with joy and energy that seemed endless. While at the edge of the yard, under the shade of a broken pillar, sat a small alien girl, her frail legs folded beneath her as if they were too weak to hold her weight. Her large eyes watched every motion of the game with a longing that she never dared to speak out loud, and when another child called to her to join, she lowered her gaze and whispered words that she had repeated too many times before. "Sorry, I cannot play ball." Her voice was soft, almost ashamed, and the other children quickly forgot her as the game drew them back into its rhythm. She had lived with her disability since birth. Her people believed it was a permanent condition that should be accepted rather than fought against. The culture she grew up in did not encourage tools or aids for those like her. Instead, they were expected to find quiet lives away from the center of society, to accept their fate without complaint. So she had grown up watching others run, climb, and play while she stayed behind and told herself it was normal that this was her place in life. Yet inside her heart burned with a wish to join them just once, to feel the thrill of chasing the ball across the dirt. Nearby, a human mechanic was working under the shell of an old cargo hauler, his hands darkened with grease, his mind lost in the sound of clanging tools. He was a stranger in this colony, an off-worlder who repaired broken engines for pay and scraps of food. Yet his ears caught the small voice of the alien girl. And for a moment, he stopped, wiping sweat from his brow and leaning back against the ship's hull. His eyes followed her gaze, and he saw not just a child watching others play, but a heart weighed down by chains he could not see. He had learned in his years among the stars that pain was not always physical, and that despair often lived in silence. The girl noticed his stare and quickly turned her face away, ashamed of her weakness, and embarrassed that an outsider had witnessed her whispered refusal. But the mechanic said nothing at first. Instead, he watched the way the children moved, and how her eyes lit up every time the ball flew high through the air before dimming again, as reality reminded her she could not join. He felt something stir inside him, a memory of Earth where long ago children who could not run were given wheels and wings by human hands, and where no one was left behind if someone was willing to try. Later, as the game ended and the children scattered, he wiped his hands and walked over to where she sat. She looked up, startled, her thin frame stiff as if she expected pity or worse. But his voice was calm when he asked, "Why did you not play?" She lowered her head and murmured as she always did, "I cannot. My legs do not work like." There's his eyes softened and he crouched down so that his gaze met hers directly. And in that moment the girl felt something strange. She was used to being looked at with pity or dismissal. But the human looked at her as though she was whole, as though her words were not the end of the story. He asked her name and she gave it shyly. He told her his in return and said that he fixed things for a living. He pointed to the old ship behind him and explained how engines that refused to start could be coaxed back to life with patience and care. She listened, though she did not fully understand. Machines were not her world. Yet something in the way he spoke made her curious, as if he was suggesting that broken did not mean useless, that weakness did not mean the end. She wanted to ask more, but fear held her tongue. When he stood to leave, she thought the moment had ended, yet he turned back and said softly, "You know, sometimes when something does not work, it only means no one has tried the right way." Yet then he walked away toward his workshop, leaving her with those words echoing in her heart, words that planted a small, fragile seed of hope, though she dared not admit it to herself. That night, as she lay in her small bed listening to the wind outside, she replayed the day in her mind, the laughter of the children, the ache in her chest, the look in the mechanic's eyes, and his strange words. She told herself not to hope that it was foolish, that humans were always speaking in riddles of possibilities, but still she drifted into sleep, holding on to the faintest dream that maybe there was a way her story did not have to end with the words, "Sorry, I cannot play ball. You said, no, right." Part 2, and Part 2 will be minimum 600 words more without dots and small lines, write in full flow. ChatGPT said. Part 2, The Human's Promise. The next morning, the colony yard was quieter than usual. The children had gone to lessons and the alien girl sat alone, tracing shapes in the dust with one weak finger. She often found herself here because it was the closest she could come to the games of others, and it gave her a chance to imagine herself among them. Her body betrayed her every time she tried to move beyond her limits. Yet her mind was still filled with dreams and stories she whispered only to herself. She was not expecting the human mechanic to approach, but she looked up when she heard the sound of heavy boots crunching across the dirt. And there he was, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, his expression firm but kind. He asked her if she had thought about what he said yesterday, and she blushed, confused and a little embarrassed. She asked him quietly what he meant, and he crouched down to her, level again, and reminded her of his words sometimes when something does not work, it only means no one has tried the right way. Yet she looked at him with wide eyes, unsure whether to laugh at his strange human optimism or to cry. Because he spoke of a possibility she had never dared imagine, she told him that her people did not believe in fixing what nature had given them, that they said her condition was permanent and not to be questioned. He listened carefully and then shook his head firmly, saying that humans did not believe in permanent limits, not when there was still something to be done. She whispered that he did not understand that she had already tried. She had wished so many times, she had prayed to the stars. She had begged the healers, but nothing ever changed. The mechanic listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said something she did not expect. He said then, "Let me try." She blinked at him in surprise, unsure she had heard correctly. He was only a mechanic, someone who repaired machines and ships. What could he possibly do for her? She told him softly that she was not a broken engine, and he smiled just a little and said, "Maybe not, but engines and people share one thing: both deserve someone who refuses to give up on them." His words carried a strange weight, and though she wanted to dismiss them, she felt something stir inside her again. That same fragile spark from yesterday. He told her that he wanted to build something for her, something that might help her stand, something that would give her a chance to move like the others. She laughed nervously, shaking her head, saying that such things belonged only in the stories humans told children. But he held her gaze and said with a calm certainty that humans built their own stories with their hands and with their stubbornness, and that he had seen too many miracles of human invention to doubt it. Now she asked him why he cared. She was not his child, not his kin, not even his species, and he could easily walk away without anyone expecting. Otherwise, he paused for a long moment, then told her that on Earth, no child was ever left behind, not if someone could help, and that he had a daughter once who had struggled to walk, but she had overcome, because no one gave up on her. The girl's heart ached at his words, and for the first time she wondered if his promise might not be empty after all. The mechanic leaned closer and said, "If you will trust me, I will make you a promise. I will not stop until I give you a chance to walk and play ball." She stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. Though she tried to hold them back, her heart battled between hope and fear. She wanted to believe him more than anything, but she had lived with disappointment for so long that believing felt dangerous still. When she whispered, "Do you really promise?" He nodded once and said yes with a firmness that made her believe he meant it. That day he returned to his workshop, and she followed, at a distance, curiosity, pulling her steps though her legs trembled with weakness. He let her watch as he began pulling scraps from piles of discarded metal and old wires, his hands moving with purpose as he muttered to himself about balance, weight distribution, and energy flow. She did not understand his technical words, but she could feel his determination filling the air like heat from a fire. And for the first time in her life, she felt that maybe her world was not closed after all. Maybe it was about to open that night. She lay awake, unable to sleep, her thoughts spinning around the image of the human bending over his workbench, sparks flying as he welded pieces together. She told herself again and again not to hope, not to dream too much, but deep in her chest, something refused to die. A small voice whispered that maybe tomorrow would be different, and though fear still clung to her heart, she held that voice close like a secret treasure she dared not share with anyone, not even herself. Sparks of hope. The following days passed with the steady sound of metal being hammered and shaped in the human mechanic's workshop. The girl began visiting more often, sometimes sitting quietly outside the doorway and sometimes daring to step inside. Though her frail legs carried her only a little distance before she needed to rest, she found herself drawn to the sight of him working, The way his hands moved with purpose. The way his brow furrowed as if every problem in the galaxy could be solved, if only he focused hard enough. He barely noticed her presence at first, muttering to himself about gears and joints and power supply. But gradually he began to explain small things to her, pointing at a piece of metal and describing how it would help support her weight, or showing her a tool and telling her its name. She did not understand most of it, yet she listened with wide eyes, soaking up every word because what he was building was for her. At first she was afraid to believe too much. She had been disappointed too many times in her short life. Each healer or elder who told her to accept her fate had added another stone to the wall around her heart. But watching the mechanic work was different. He did not see her as broken. He saw her as someone waiting to stand. She noticed how carefully he measured every piece, holding it up to her frame, sometimes asking her to extend her thin arm so he could check the proportions, sometimes asking her to place her small foot on a platform so he could imagine the weight she would carry. He spoke gently, yet with confidence, as if he had no doubt she would use what he was building. The other children began to whisper when they saw her lingering around the workshop. Some of them laughed, saying that the strange human was filling her head with foolish dreams. Others were curious and asked if he was really building something. For her, she blushed and avoided their questions, but secretly she felt a thrill, that for once they were speaking about her, not as the one who could not join, but as the one who might change, even if they mocked it. Felt better than being invisible one. Afternoon, as she sat inside the workshop, the mechanic placed a small device on the table before her. It was a curved piece of metal with strange joints and wires attached. He told her it was only a prototype, something to test the way her muscles reacted. He helped her strap it to her arm, and though it was clumsy and heavy, she felt a faint vibration run through it when he activated the mechanism. Her thin arm lifted more easily than it ever had before. She gasped in shock, staring at her own hand rising into the air without the usual trembling weakness. The mechanic grinned at her expression and said, "This is only the beginning." Tears pricked her eyes as she lowered the arm again. She whispered that it felt like magic. But he shook his head and told her it was not magic, it was human stubbornness made real through tools and work. He said, humans had always been told what they could not do, and they had answered by doing it anyway. He said her weakness was only a challenge. Not a sentence, and challenges were meant to be overcome. She wanted to argue that her people would never accept it, but the joy of that small moment overwhelmed her, and she found herself smiling through tears for the first time in years. She began to visit him every day after that, watching the pieces grow more complex as he shaped what looked like a frame that could hold her body upright. He worked with patience, and explained that it had to be light enough for her to move freely, yet strong enough to carry her. He scavenged old ship parts, discarded wires and bits of plating, making something new out of what others had thrown away. She began to feel that same transformation in herself, that maybe she too was not a discarded piece, but something that could be rebuilt into something stronger. Rumors spread faster now, and even some of the elders began to take notice, muttering about the human's strange experiments. Some warned her family that she would be humiliated when his device failed. Others whispered that meddling with nature was dangerous. Her parents argued in hushed voices at night, torn between fear of ridicule and the sight of hope returning to their daughter's eyes, but no amount of warning could pull her away from the workshop where sparks flew, and the future slowly took shape. One evening, as the twin moons rose above the colony, she sat outside the workshop while the mechanic adjusted another piece of the device. He looked up and asked her if she was ready to try something greater. Soon she swallowed hard, fear and excitement twisting inside her, and she nodded her head with a determination that surprised even herself, because though she was still afraid of falling, still afraid of failing, she had tasted the possibility of more, and once tasted hope was impossible to let go of. Resistance from the council as the days turned into weeks. The sound of the human mechanic's work became a constant rhythm in the colony, sparks flashing late into the night as he shaped the strange frame that would one day hold the frail alien girl on her feet. But not everyone was pleased with what he was doing. Whispers turned into voices, and voices became warnings, until finally the matter reached the ears of the colony council. The group of elders who guarded the traditions of her people, they gathered in their hall. Tall figures draped in ceremonial cloths, their eyes glowing with disapproval when they summoned the human to stand before them. He came still wearing his stained work clothes, grease on his hands and sweat on his brow. He looked out of place among their polished dignity, but he did not bow his head. Instead, he folded his arms and waited for their judgment. The council leader spoke first, telling him that they had heard of his work and that he must cease immediately. They declared that what he was doing was unnatural, that the girl's condition was the will of the stars, and that to interfere with it was to insult the balance of life. The mechanic listened quietly until they finished, and then he shook his head, saying he did not believe in leaving a child broken when it was possible to give her a chance to live. He explained that on Earth humans had always sought to heal, to build, to overcome, and that disability was never treated as fate but as a challenge to meet with courage. The elders bristled at his words, some accusing him of arrogance, others muttering that humans always sought to change what should not be changed. The girl sat in the back of the hall watching with trembling hands. She wanted to speak to defend him, but fear held her tongue. Her people had taught her all her life to stay silent, to accept. She saw her parents seated on the side, their faces torn between worry and pride. Her mother's hands clutched tightly together, her father's eyes darting from the human to the elders, as though searching for an escape from what was unfolding, when one elder declared that if the human continued, he would be exiled from the colony. A gasp rose from the crowd, yet the mechanic only shrugged and said, exile was nothing compared to seeing a child left in chains of flesh and bone. The hall erupted in angry murmurs, yet his words echoed in the girl's chest louder than any condemnation she had ever heard. She saw in his face the stubbornness of someone who had faced resistance before, and she realized that he was willing to stand alone against a council for her sake, something no one had ever done for her in her life. The leader of the council raised his hand and declared the meeting over, but not before issuing a final command that the human was forbidden from interfering with the child any further. Her parents were warned to keep her away from his workshop or face disgrace in the eyes of the colony. That night her home was heavy with silence. Her parents argued again, her mother pleading that they obey the council to keep their family safe. Her father torn between fear and the light he had seen return to his daughter's eyes. The girl sat by her window listening to their voices and feeling her heart twist. She knew what the council wanted. She knew what tradition demanded. But she also knew what she had felt. When the prototype lifted her arm, when hope had surged inside her like fire, she could not let that go. The next day she found herself outside the mechanic's workshop again. Despite the warnings, her legs trembling, not just from weakness, but from fear. She wondered if he would send her away to protect himself. But when he opened the door and saw her, he only smiled, tired but unbroken, and told her they had work to do. She stepped inside, and for the first time she felt a quiet rebellion grow. Inside her, not loud like the human's defiance, but steady and unyielding. She realized that even if the entire council stood against them, she could no longer accept a life of watching from the sidelines. The children of the colony began to gather, at a distance whispering about what would happen next. Some laughed and predicted disaster. Others watched with wide eyes as if secretly wishing they could see the miracle unfold. Even the elders could not stop their curiosity. And sometimes one or two were seen standing in the shadows near the workshop, shaking their heads but not turning away. The mechanic ignored them all, focusing only on his work and on the girl he was determined to help. He told her that the louder the resistance, the closer they were to something worth doing, and she believed him. With every new piece added to the frame, her anticipation grew. So did her fear, because she knew that soon she would have to test it before all those watching eyes, before the council that wanted her silent, before the children who had never let her play. She lay awake at night imagining both triumph and failure. But no matter how her dreams ended, she knew she would face it, because she could not turn back anymore. The path was set, and she would walk it or fall trying. The first trial, the day of the trial, arrived without fanfare, yet in the girl's heart, it felt like the entire universe was holding its breath. She sat on a stool inside the workshop, her frail frame tense as the human mechanic worked around her with steady hands. The device he had built was unlike anything her people had ever seen. a light but strong frame shaped from scavenged alloys lined with padding to fit her small body and wires that glowed faintly when he tested the energy flow. It looked both terrifying and miraculous, and though she had watched it take shape over many weeks, she could hardly believe it was now ready for her. He crouched in front of her, explaining each piece as he attached it: the braces that would hug her legs, the supports at her waist, the tiny servos hidden inside that would move when she tried to step. He told her it would not do everything for her. It would not carry her like a passenger. But it would give her the strength her own body lacked. She listened with wide eyes, trying to keep her breathing steady while doubt gnawed at the edges of her hope. What if it failed? What if she fell in front of everyone? What if this miracle broke and left her worse than before? Outside the workshop, whispers had grown into a crowd. Children pressed against the windows, daring one another to peek inside. Elders stood at a distance, arms folded in disapproval, but unable to stop watching her parents. Were there too, their faces tight with fear? Her mother wringing her hands, her father's jaw set firm as though holding back words of both pride and dread. The entire colony seemed to have gathered, pulled by curiosity, and by the weight of what this moment could mean. The mechanic placed the last strap in place and looked into her eyes, asking if she was ready. Her lips trembled and she whispered that she was afraid. He nodded as though he had expected it, and told her that fear was proof. She understood the risk and courage was choosing to act anyway. She held on to those words like a lifeline, and when he stepped back, she gripped the supports on either side of the stool, her heart hammering in her chest. With his guidance, she placed one foot forward, the mechanical brace responding with a soft hum, lifting where her own muscles faltered. She gasped as her body shifted in a way it never had before she leaned heavily on the supports. But the step was real. And when she tried again, the frame caught her weight, steadying her. She felt a surge of heat in her chest that was not fear but something far brighter. The children outside gasped, and one cried out that she was standing, truly standing for the first time. The human encouraged her to try again. Slowly guiding her movement step by shaky step, her legs trembled, but the device carried her forward. Her arms clutched the supports, yet each motion grew less desperate, more controlled. She felt sweat on her brow and her breaths came fast, but she could not stop smiling. Even as tears streamed down her cheeks, she whispered again and again, "I am doing it. I am doing it," as though the words themselves gave her strength. The crowd outside was no longer silent. Murmurs rose, some voices filled with awe, others with doubt, but none could deny what their eyes saw. The elders exchanged uneasy glances as their traditions cracked beneath the weight of living proof. Her mother covered her mouth with both hands as sobs shook her shoulders. Her father's eyes glistened, though he stood tall and tried not to show it. At last, after what felt like both an eternity and a single heartbeat, she reached the far wall of the workshop, leaning heavily on the supports, but standing tall, her chest heaving, her legs weak yet stronger than they had ever been. She turned to face the mechanic and saw the pride in his eyes. Not boastful pride, but the quiet satisfaction of someone who had promised and delivered. He asked her softly if she was ready to try without the supports, and though terror shot through her, she found herself nodding. He stepped back and she stood trembling, every muscle in her body screaming to sit down, but her will stronger than it had ever been. She lifted one foot and placed it ahead of the other. The frame groaned. The servos whirred, and she took her first unsupported step, then another. Her balance wavered, but she did not fall, and when she looked up, she saw the workshop door open wide and the entire colony staring in silence. She had never been more exposed, never been more vulnerable. And yet she smiled through her tears because for the first time in her life she was not watching from the shadows. She was standing in the center of the world. The game begins. The excitement in the colony was electric, and the alien girl felt it thrumming through her veins, as if the air itself vibrated with anticipation. She had learned to walk to her own rhythm now, and every step felt like a small victory. But today the human mechanic had promised something more than walking. He had built a field, a place where she could test her new strength, and for the first time imagine herself playing with the others. The field was a stretch of smooth ground surrounded by low walls to keep the ball from rolling away beyond that. The landscape was uneven with rocks and patches of soft sand. but he had adapted it with ramps and rails to match her movement. She approached hesitantly, unsure if she could truly participate. She had only practiced in the controlled environment of the workshop, but the human crouched beside her, whispering words that were equal parts encouragement and warning, reminding her to trust the machine and trust herself. The other children gathered. On the opposite side, their eyes wide, some curious, some doubtful, but all intrigued by the small alien girl stepping into the center of their makeshift court. She felt their stares prickling her skin, and her chest tightened. Yet she drew a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs, and when she exhaled, she felt a strange calm settle over her, as if the braces were not just carrying her body, but also her courage. The human handed her the ball. It was slightly larger than her hands could fully encompass, and heavy but balanced to account for her new strength. She clutched it and felt the energy hum through the device, a vibration that matched her heartbeat. And when she lifted it, she realized she could toss it higher and farther than she had ever imagined. She glanced at the other children, who nodded in challenge, and she smiled, letting herself feel the thrill that had always been denied. She threw the ball the first time. It soared awkwardly, but true landing near one of the other children, and she laughed a sound she had never made before on a field of play. Her laughter mingled with the human's encouragement and the cheers from the crowd who had begun to gather at the edges of the field. Parents and elders craned their necks and whispered to one another in disbelief as they saw her move with speed and agility that no one had expected, and the whispers carried both fear and wonder. The game began in earnest. She ran forward, her mechanical legs absorbing every stumble. She had taken a dozen steps before without support, but now she moved fluidly, as if the braces were an extension of her own will. She passed the ball between her teammates and herself, in a rhythm that felt natural. The other children adapted quickly, impressed by her sudden skill, and when she launched the ball across the field, it arced beautifully over the heads of the tallest children and landed in her friends' hands. A cheer erupted from the crowd, and even the elders, who had frowned earlier, found themselves caught in the excitement. She felt the wind on her face and the strain in her muscles and the exhilaration that came from moving freely. She dodged and jumped and sprinted, her frame supported yet responsive, and with each motion, she grew bolder, trying maneuvers she had only dreamed of attempting before. The human mechanic stayed close, watching her with a quiet smile, ready to intervene if anything went wrong, but he did not need to. She was learning quickly, letting the braces guide her without relying on them entirely. The game shifted into something larger than just fun. It became a test, a challenge, and a celebration. At once she scored points and missed some, and each time she fell, the braces absorbed the impact, letting her rise again unscathed. And every step she took inspired others, children who had once doubted her, to cheer and try harder to match her pace and her skill. She felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with winning. It was the simple joy of discovering she could do what she had been told she never could. Time stretched and blurred as she played, the sun rising high over the colony, painting the field in golden light, her laughter ringing across the ground. She forgot pain and fear and even the whisper of doubt. She felt alive in a way that transcended her body. The braces were not just machines, they were an extension of possibility, and every movement told a story of resilience, determination, and trust. And as she sprinted across the field, tossing and catching the ball, her eyes met the human mechanics, and she knew they had built more than a device. They had built a bridge from limitation to freedom. And in that moment, the entire colony witnessed it. Not just the girl playing ball, but the power of one person refusing to accept boundaries, and another willing to see potential where others saw weakness. And the game continued, with laughter and cheers echoing across the field, as the alien girl became more than she had ever imagined she could be, and for the first time she was not simply a participant in the world, she was a force moving through it, challenging it, shaping it, redefining it with every step, every leap, every throw. Triumph beyond the field. The alien girl's heart pounded as the final stretch of the game unfolded. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the field, and the air was thick with anticipation. She had never felt anything like it before. The crowd pressed closer to the edges of the field, their voices blending into a low roar that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath her feet. She adjusted her stance and felt the braces respond instantly to her intent. Every movement she made was precise yet fluid every step, a testament to the countless hours she had spent learning, trusting the human who had never doubted her and herself. The ball came toward her faster than she had expected, but she met it without hesitation, her hands gripping it firmly, and the braces absorbing the shock of the impact, as if the machine had become part of her body. She pivoted and launched it toward her teammate, who sprinted forward, catching it midair, and the two of them moved in a rhythm that seemed almost choreographed. Every pass, a statement, every dodge, a declaration of her newfound strength and skill. The other children tried to keep pace, but her confidence inspired them to push harder, to run faster, to reach higher than they had imagined possible. The human mechanic stood at the edge of the field, watching his creation blossom. Before his eyes, he had always known she could do it, but seeing her move with such grace and power filled him with a deep satisfaction, a mixture of pride and awe. He had given her the tools, but she had given them meaning by refusing to let fear or doubt hold her back, and as he watched the alien girl sprint and leap with abandon, he realized that this moment was about more than a game. It was about showing the entire colony what was possible when compassion and ingenuity met determination. The game intensified, the children on both sides now moving with a newfound energy and focus. The alien girl ducked under a low pass and then leaped higher than she had ever thought she could, her hands meeting the ball at its apex and sending it hurtling toward the goal with perfect accuracy. A cheer erupted from the crowd, louder than anything she had ever heard before. The elders clapped and smiled. Some even laughed openly, their disbelief replaced by admiration and respect as they witnessed what had once seemed impossible take shape in real time. Her muscles burned and her lungs ached, yet she felt no fatigue, for the excitement coursing through her veins was stronger than any exhaustion she had known. She ran faster than she had ever run, dodging around her peers, weaving through the field as if gravity itself had become her ally. Each motion perfectly synchronized with the braces, amplifying her every action. And when she passed the ball again, she noticed the other children were learning from her movements, imitating her stance, her throws, her leaps, and suddenly the game was not just about winning. It was about learning and growing together, sharing the joy of discovery and mastery. As the final moments approached, she glanced toward the human mechanic, and their eyes met for a brief instant, a silent communication passing between them. He nodded encouragingly, and she smiled, letting that affirmation give her one last surge of energy. She sprinted forward, catching a fast-moving pass, and with a powerful leap twisted in midair, sending the ball in a perfect arc toward the goal. The impact of the score reverberated through the field, and the crowd erupted in applause, shouting, cheering, and clapping in a wave of sound that seemed to lift her off the ground. She landed lightly on her feet and for the first time in her life felt completely free, unbounded by limitation, unshackled from doubt. And the alien girl realized that it was not the braces alone that had made this possible. It was the trust, the care, the human's ingenuity, and her own willingness to embrace the impossible. She had stepped beyond her fears into a space where potential became reality and limitation became opportunity. The game ended with laughter and cheers echoing across the field. The children gathered around her, lifting her in celebration, and the human mechanic stepped forward to place a hand on her shoulder. His eyes gleaming with pride, she looked at him, and for the first time felt a deep understanding that they had achieved something far beyond a simple match. They had redefined what was possible for her, for the children, for the colony, and perhaps for anyone who had ever been told they could not do something. And as the sun sat painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, she stood in the middle of the field, surrounded by friends and family, by the curious and the inspired, and she knew that this moment would live forever, not just in memory but in the spirit of every child who had watched her play and realized that sometimes courage and ingenuity could defy every expectation, and that the human mechanic's plan had done more than give her the ability to play. It had given her the freedom to be extraordinary. New dawn of possibility. The alien girl stood at the edge of the field, feeling the wind brush against her face, and for the first time she realized how limitless the world could be. The braces hummed softly around her legs and arms, a gentle vibration that reminded her of the bond she shared with the human mechanic who had believed in her when no one else had. She looked around at the children who had gathered, their eyes wide with awe and admiration, and a smile spread across her face because she knew that she had done more than play a game. She had opened a door to a future where nothing was impossible. The human mechanic approached quietly, his hands in his pockets, but his eyes shining with pride. He knelt beside her and whispered that today was just the beginning, that there were worlds beyond their colony that needed brave hearts and inventive minds, and that she had already proven she could rise to any challenge. She nodded, feeling the weight of that responsibility. Yet also, the thrill of adventure coursing through her veins, the lessons of courage and determination had taken root, and they would grow stronger with every step she took. Around them, the colony was alive with excitement. The elders no longer whispered doubts, but spoke openly of hope and inspiration, and the children mimicked her movements even without the braces, learning to push beyond what they had thought possible. The alien girl realized that her journey had become a spark, a single flame that could ignite imagination and courage in countless others, and that the human mechanic's plan had done more than give her strength. It had created a ripple that could change the entire colony, and perhaps one day the galaxy. She lifted her gaze to the horizon where the first stars of evening began to glimmer, the sky vast and infinite, and she felt a deep connection to everything around her. The field, the people, the machines, and the possibilities that awaited them all. She imagined adventures, yet to come battles of wit and skill, and moments where ingenuity and heart would triumph over fear and limitation. And she knew that she was ready, that together with the human mechanic they could face whatever challenges lay ahead and transform them into victories beyond imagination. Laughter and cheers echoed behind her, the children racing to share their own discoveries and victories. The elders nodded in approval, acknowledging that a new chapter had begun, one where strength was measured, not just in physical ability but in resilience, creativity, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. The alien girl felt a surge of energy and hope that filled every fiber of her being, and she took a step forward, knowing that this was the path she was meant to follow and that no obstacle could hold her back, because she had already learned to rise. The human mechanic stood beside her, watching silently as the sun disappeared fully behind the distant hills, and darkness gave way to a tapestry of stars, and in that quiet moment a sense of peace and anticipation settled over them both. They had changed each other and those around them, and the impact of their actions would resonate far beyond the field, beyond the colony, beyond what they could see or imagine. Yet it all began here with trust, courage, and the belief that nothing was impossible when hearts and minds worked together. And as the alien girl took a deep breath and felt the energy of the field beneath her feet, she knew that life had transformed into something extraordinary, that every limitation was now a challenge to overcome, every fear an opportunity to grow, and every day a chance to inspire. She turned to the human mechanic and nodded silently, understanding that their journey had only just begun, and that the best adventures were yet to come as laughter and excitement filled the air, carrying promises of discovery and triumph. The end.